We've started.
Okay.
Hello everyone. Today we're going to speak about Moscow taxis.
It seemed to be the logical follow-on to the last one. For the expat like myself coming to Moscow, you'll find taxis are pretty darn good. You'll almost certainly find they're a lot less expensive than in other countries. Certainly a lot less expensive than I'm used to in Britain. Doesn't mean there hasn't been some changes though.
And so you've been living in Moscow for more than 13
Mm,
years now.
yes, coming up to 14 years, yeah.
What are the noticeable changes?
Ha, yes. Um, when I first came here, finding what I suppose you might call an official taxi was quite a difficult thing. Now, this might sound like it's a problem, but in fact, it was remarkably easy. You see, almost everybody who had a car in those days, if they thought they could make a few extra rubles, would stop and use it as a taxi. And the system was quite simple. You would stand by the side of the road and just stick your arm out. Sooner or later, somebody would stop and ask you where you wanted to go. Because they weren't official taxis, you then had to negotiate the price. In those days, and perhaps still today when it happens, always leave the negotiation to the local Russian lady or gentleman that you have to be with.
So always have a local
Oh, yes.
Russian
Oh, yes.
someone.
If you don't, you will be taken on a tour of Moscow and charged a small fortune. And it's not necessarily because they were trying to cheat you, it's because basically every car in Moscow was a taxi and most of them didn't know where they were going in those days. There were certain things you had to watch out for, though.
Like,
Well, the classic story. Somebody asked me about how I was explaining this, I should say, to somebody in Britain. And they were asking me what sort of things you should watch out for. And I remembered the time that Maria and I stopped the car as a taxi, and it wasn't an official taxi. Well, we got in the back of this thing, and the driver went shooting up the road, as is the usual Moscow custom, totally ignoring the speed limits. The other thing, of course, he was doing, which surprises British drivers, because in Britain, it's hard to explain. Maybe it's the natural instinct we have to form queues. But the worst thing you can do if you're a British motorist is change lanes frequently.
okay.
Now, this simply doesn't apply in Russia.
I think we enjoy queues, but
But you
only
like going around them. And boom, boom, boom. Anyway, we got in this taxi or car, and the guy shot up at the road, as I say, as usual, exceeding the speed limit. But he was swapping lanes more than most. And I noticed that every so often he would duck his head down right like this and fumble around his feet. And I couldn't understand what was happening until I looked over the top. And I suddenly realised this guy had only got one leg. And he was driving a car with a three-pedal system. So what he did was, in his left hand, he had a walking stick, which he had cut short. And he was using this to prod the clutch.
nice.
And then his leg for the brakes and the accelerator. But the thing was, every so often he dropped his stick and he would stick his head down under the dashboard and fumble around looking for it. And of course, while he was doing this, the car was going all over the place.
Talent and innovation.
Brilliant, yeah, except I have never been so frightened in my life. This guy was lethal. So when I was asked by friends afterwards, British friends, what you had to watch out for in a Moscow taxi, my answer was count the legs of the driver. And if the answer comes to less than two, get another taxi.
Or a good discount.
Or a good discount,
Yeah.
yes. And make sure your insurance is paid up. Some of the other things I came across in those days were a bit strange. I always remember getting in one cab and going somewhere. And it was only when we were halfway along I looked up at the windscreen and I realised there were 3 bullet holes in the windscreen. Doesn't inspire confidence, you know. Today, I think the average sort of Western visitor to Moscow will be quite pleased with the taxi service. It's largely controlled by firms like Uber. Certainly by European standards, the taxis are very, very cheap here. Probably because the fuel costs are so low. But whatever, you'll be agreeably surprised. There is only one problem.
And that is...
You've got to have your smartphone. Because every time you try and stop one of these official cabs, he will tell you that he's on his way to another job. Now, this isn't a great problem if you've got a mobile phone handy, and of course, if you speak Russian, because they're very good and they're very quick. But stopping one in the streets is very, very tricky. Basically, you stick your hand out, and there's still a few of the old school taxi drivers about, and they will stop for you.
So you can still get some fun.
Yep, but watch out. Remember what I said. Count the number of legs on the driver. And if you're not happy with the answer,
Check your insurance.
yes.